Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Dr. Crocko. Welcome back to the channel. How is everybody doing? Hope everyone's having a good weekend. Spooky Sunday, episode number 21, Strange Creatures. It's very good to see everybody. Now, if there's anybody new here, which I doubt it because we're being suppressed to the highest level, this is just a fun show. Nothing's taken too serious. We just come over here to have a fun time and talk about spooky, weird shit. Just had a very long interview, very fun stream with Adam Green of No More News. Went about 2 hours. We had a great time. Now I'm trying to share this link out on Twitter, over on Discord, because we're going to be talking about the likes of Dogmen and Bigfoot and Thunderbirds, Mothman, flying humanoids, maybe the New Jersey Devil will make an appearance. And at this point, we're not showing up in anybody's sub feed, so it's going to be a very small audience. So you put a lot of work in, a lot of research and articles and clips, timestamps, and not a lot of people are going to be able to see it. So it is what it is. Very limited hangout. We're just going to have to deal with it. Now, I was hoping the chat was going to work on the screen for the entirety of the stream. Looks like it's trying to catch up a little bit. Hopefully it will catch up on your end too. See how fast it's going. Let's wait for that to catch up. Let's just see if it stays at a steady level. It's very weird that hopefully it just goes well. I'm trying to see if it's, okay, it looks like it's working normal now. So it needs a few seconds to get going. Okay. Now, Fata Kings made this little template for us. Nothing too crowded. The last one had a lot of images and writing on it. This one's very non-assuming. Nice creepy background. It's all one thing, not mixed and matched. I'm actually inserted in, so I'm behind it's a cutout. I think it looks very good. So shout out to Fata Kings for making us this template. Shout out to Fata Kings for making the intro to Spooky Sundays. We're going to probably work on a new one after this quarantine is over. All right. Oh, yeah, he said he made it in 5 seconds. Well, I can't make one. I don't know what I'm doing, so it's better than anything I could have came up with. Now, like I said, we're going to be talking about strange creatures, dogmen, Bigfoot, and we'll just get through as many as we can and try to bring it back to that spooky factor that we had for maybe the first 10 weeks. Then we got off into the conspiratorial. I think it's a good time during a quarantine to have some very spooky stories, and I think these creatures kind of bring those out. So I hope everyone enjoys tonight's stream. If you want to support what we're doing here, I'm going to put a PayPal link and Streamlab link in the chat. Don't feel obligated. I know everyone's going through something right now, but if you do have anything extra you can throw towards the show. It's been pretty rough with the censorship, I will say that. So if you want to, we very much appreciate it, but nothing's obligated. Thank you to everybody that made their way here. I'm glad you guys went out of your way to find the video, or maybe you saw the link that I shared. Everyone told me they had to go straight to my page to find it. And that's just where we're at with pretty much all channels right now. So let me make sure I have all my links ready. I'm going to have a bunch of stories about dogmen to start it. And I think we're just going to start with a story that we did talk about a couple weeks ago to kind of refresh us on what's going on. Okay, let me make sure I have it all ready. And like I said, if there's anybody new, these are in the vein of a coast to coast. These are in the vein of just a fun late night spooky show.
We are tracking some breaking news tonight.
Breadcrumbs for me to find out more truths about the Dogman and what it is and where I came from, I guess, my history. And it's all came around full circle for me. And that's how me and Vic came to talk again about some things that I found out over time.
Yeah, the things you found out, they're not easy to deal with, to say the least. Speaking of that, 4 days ago, a boy was killed under strange circumstances in Kentucky. That incident caused you to start doing something you hope not to do again. Please expand on that for us.
Well, 4 days ago in the state of Kentucky, a young boy was killed, 13 years old, at his home. And he was killed by a canine, which is, at this moment, is unidentified. Some folks are saying that it was a coyote. And from what I've read online in the news articles, the boy was dragged away from his home 600 to 400 yards up a cliff face where he was killed by this canine. And after learning that news, it brought a lot back, because it's just not possible for a coyote to drag a 13-year-old boy up a cliff face. And it's really messed me up, because it's brought back a lot of things.
Yeah, you know what they say, it's best not to open up old wounds, for good reason too. You told me you didn't think you'd ever come back on the show. What made you decide to come on and do that?
Well, as I said, that I had no interest in doing any field research on the dog man.
So we played that story the other day, or I actually read a couple articles on that story. A 13-year-old boy dragged into the woods, unknown canine, unsolved case, boy was murdered. The scene was heavy forest, dragged him up a cliff, and no one ever knew what kind of canine this was. We still don't have any updates on the case. The area it's in, a lot of people think it's a dog man. Now we know some of these stories are very conspiratorial, and that's why we just have fun over here. Don't take anything too serious. Shout out to Social Observer for the $5 super chat. Says Wilcock literally called a Babe Ruth Q shot today. 3 days of darkness, no internet or phones while arrests take place, only EMS messages. Terry McKinney, shout out for the $2 super chat, says Baroque asked. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate that message. Broke asked. Thank you. Now you guys can let me know if the volume of the music is good. If it's too low, too loud, just let me know in the chat. We're going to get through a couple stories here. Shout out to Cody Pendant, $10 PayPal donation. Appreciate it, brother. If it's a Streamlabs, I will check it. Okay. Now, a lot of people ask, which cryptids do you believe in? Which ones are supernatural? Which ones are just natural animals? And which ones just aren't classified? Which ones are flesh and blood creatures? Where do they come from? There is no doubt at all that there are multiple types of cryptids in our midst. And we're going to have to look through the multiple different ones that people have told us they've seen out in the woods. People have had strange sightings all over the place. Sometimes they see them with a UFO present. Now, we have everything from the chupacabra to the orang pendek to the dogman to lizards to Bigfoot to flying humanoids. But one of the most controversial is the dogmen. They never seem to go away. So many drawings, depictions, stories. There's great shows that talk about them all the time. And most people would think that maybe you're talking about a werewolf. Except that there's barely a dogman case on record which involves someone shape-shifting into a creature. It's always just someone sees the flesh and blood creature. Some people think they're some kind of telepathic creature that comes through a portal, and they're actually not flesh and blood. Now, almost exclusively the dogmen appear to be, some kind of upright wolf, some kind of dog-human hybrid, some kind of Bigfoot creature. Now, that would be enough to raise the eyebrows of most people. But when you study them and you stumble across the trend where dogmen are seen at sacred sites, ancient mounds, they seem to travel by themselves. I don't hear many stories of them in packs. You start to get very interested in these creatures. Now, some people have had bizarre encounters with what they call telepathic dogmen. Now, these things have gained like a cult-like following for a niche community on YouTube. There's a show called Dogmen Encounters that follows stories. They have a weekly show where somebody comes on and talks about their encounter. Now, much as the name suggests, these entities are usually described as being very tall, bipedal, covered with shaggy hair, much like a well-known Sasquatch. But in this case, they also have pointed muzzles and features of a canine nature. Spotted in many regions in the United States, the dogmen are a bizarre phenomenon that manages to teeter where the lines of Bigfoot, werewolves, and the paranormal urban legends intersect. Yet taking things deeper into a strange world are the various reports that suggest these beings utilize a mental power of telepathy as well. One very interesting and quite bizarre account comes from a witness who posted her experience in a blog I was looking at and claims that she had regular telepathic contact with a dogman itself. This entity was first encountered by the witness in a rugged mountain setting in New Mexico, where she was out one day with her fiance for a hike. At one point during their peaceful walk, her fiance suddenly called out to her to be careful of a bear ahead. Looking forward, she saw what he was talking about, as a hulking brown shape could be seen, heard crashing through the thick woods. Now, seeing a bear out there was quite unexpected, but what's even stranger was what allegedly happened next. This is the witness statement itself. Hopefully the music is at a good level. Let me know if it's, sounds good. It didn't turn and look at me, but kept a very fast pace walking down what we eventually saw was a path. I said to my fiance how weird this fellow was, but he couldn't see him. I then pointed to the location of where he went as he walked in that direction. That is when the horrible feeling hit us both in the gut. Something told both of us to stay back. It was a clear message, and one I was willing to ignore, but not Michael. I wanted to go down the path further, but he said it was too dangerous. I must say the feeling in our gut was like a slight punch, almost a nauseating feeling. It affected our heart rates and our adrenaline was racing. I could feel my heartbeat all over my body. It was at the point that I decided to take photos in the direction the strange hiker had gone. It was one of those photos that we captured that turned out to be a dogman. He was standing and watching us as we were trying to figure out what to do next. We didn't smell him at all. He didn't have any odor any more than the bear did. But I must say, we did feel him. Even after we got home, the witness said she maintained a sort of psychic connection with the spooky entity, and that she learned a lot of new and surprising things through this. One thing she claims that she was able to glean from her exchanges with the dogmen is that despite their fierce appearance, these dogmen are not violent or vicious creatures at all. Another account of telepathy and dogmen was given to another site, and he claimed that he was a regular telepathic contact with a dogman. We hear multiple stories where people feel this connection. I've also heard these stories with Sasquatch like figures. Now we're gonna go through a bunch of different stories, and I'm gonna put in some clips as well. People talk about extraterrestrial dogmen, bizarre beasts that live between the lakes. They have all types of different cryptids. You'll hear everything from dogmen to ape men to deer men. So let me tell you the tale of the bizarre beast of the land between the lakes. Located in rural Kentucky and Tennessee in the United States, tucked between Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake, is a national recreation area called the Land Between the Lakes, which was originally formed by President John F. Kennedy in 1963. Besides its modern-day designation as a recreation area encompassing 170,000 acres, over 300 miles of shoreline, and hundreds of miles of hiking trails. The area has also long been plagued by a variety of high strangeness, such as roving phantoms, Indian curses, mysterious lights, but perhaps the most bizarre is the history of strange tales of a bizarre bipedal creature which prowls the landscape here and has been called the beast between the rivers, or the beast between the land of the lakes. The creature itself is typically said to look rather like a bipedal wolf standing around 7 feet tall, sporting clawed hands, powerful jaws with wicked teeth, glowing red eyes. They say it has a rotting stench. The area around its region have long held such dark legends from before the time of the first settlers to trickle into western Kentucky. Kentucky seems to be a hotbed for these kind of stories. Now, some of the first Europeans in the region were French trappers, hunters, and these people claimed that the forests were prowled by a massive beast, half man, half wolf, which would howl in the night and leave mutilated carcasses of animals in its wake. A monstrous entity that was called the loup-garou. In some instances, these hunters and trappers were said to venture into the wilderness to never be seen again. And this was blamed on the mysterious ravenous beast. According to the native Shawnee tribe, this abomination was the spirit of a powerful shape-shifting shaman, and outsiders were frequently warned away from the area. When settlers began to come to the region, they are said to have been plagued by some large predator which lurked in the shadows, killing and maiming their livestock, with witnesses saying the culprit was a hairy wolf-like beast on 2 legs, which unleashed blood-curdling howls and shrieks into the night.
Hi. Is an alleged werewolf-type being that stalked the cornfields of southeast Wisconsin. In the 90s, the inception of the Beast of Bray Road is as follows. Some teenagers from a school in East Elkhorn, Wisconsin, were talking about shared sightings and encounters with the alleged werewolf. The school bus driver mentioned these conversations to her friend, a different school bus driver, who mentioned it to Linda Godfrey. Godfrey is the journalist and subsequent author who was the first to cover the story of the Beast of Bray Road. Surprisingly, many of the sightings had been reported to the county animal control officer. Officer Fredrickson, in fact, had a file on werewolf sightings, and those are the sightings I will focus on because they are the most credible, seeing as law enforcement felt the need to document them. Andreezy, a young manager at a local lounge, reported that in 1989, she distinctly saw a werewolf, elbows facing up, gripping roadkill with long, sharp claws. She stressed that it was not larger than an average man, 5'7", maybe 150 pounds. She said that it was brownish gray, and its eyes reflected her headlights as it watched her drive by. In 1990, a group of 13-year-old sledders had a menacing encounter with the creature. Near dusk, they saw what they thought was a big dog, until it stood up. The incident was reported by one of the sledders' mothers, named Karen. She said that the kids were terrified, and that they saw a creature with silver-tipped brown fur. It had a face like a coyote, but its legs were proportionately too large to be a dog, coyote, or wolf. It watched the kids, and then gave chase, but retreated into a cornfield once the kids had ran half a mile. It, quote, ran like a dog but with bigger bounds. Then in 1992, a teenager named Tom Brichta reported that he saw the creature twice, while driving to a campground near Bray Road, on Highway 6. He thought he hit a mailbox on a foggy night. Brichta reversed his car, only to have a, quote, long, odd-shaped arm reach at him through his open car window. He said its belly was at the top of the car, so he never saw its face. He saw thick nails and fuzzy feet before he sped off. Tom Brichta reported the incident to Lieutenant Lenz, a police officer with Jefferson County. Lieutenant Lenz notes that 30 minutes after Brichta's encounter, a truck drove into a ditch due to a, quote, something crossing the road at an apparently inopportune time. Dispatch found no trace of Brichta's encounter, or the truck driver's creature, though the incidents took place 7 miles and 30 minutes apart. If it were the same creature, it must have been running at about 14 miles per hour in a straight shot down the road, so they are presumably and plausibly related. Brichta had a second sighting. It was on the same highway 2 months later in October of '92. He said he saw, quote, shoulders and a head sticking out of 6-foot-tall corn. He described the head and legs as dog-like, but very muscular. He said the creature, quote, snickered at him, and had the attitude of a person window shopping. And after the Beast of Bray Road became a local household name, a man reported a story that his father told him years ago. That story occurred in 1936 at St. Coletta's Catholic Convent. The convent began as a, quote, school for the feeble-minded. That is Coletta's self-description. But in the 1930s, it was acting as a sanitarium. St. Coletta's is where the patriarch of the Kennedy clan had Rose Kennedy lobotomized and subsequently held after the procedure turned her into an invalid. St. Coletta's night watchman, named Mark Shackleman, said that he encountered a man-sized werewolf digging on a Native American effigy mound on the property. Shackleman said that he was sure it was satanic and that it didn't go away until he prayed. He also said it could speak in a human-like way, but not English. He believes the creature or entity identified itself as Gadara. So, million-dollar question. Do I think that these witnesses were seeing Bigfoot and misidentifying them as werewolves? No, I do not. As Bigfoot researchers, we put an awful lot of stock and veracity into eyewitness reports. If we claim that a witness can distinguish between a bear and a Bigfoot, then we must believe that a witness can distinguish between a werewolf and anything else. And as far as the reports are concerned, there is no doubt as to what the witnesses claim to see. Godfrey's sketch of Andreezy's sighting leaves little doubt that mistaken identity is a factor. She also specifically reported, quote, long, sharp claws, which does not correlate with what we know of Bigfoot. Even in silhouette, the ears, narrow shoulders, and snout do not make a good case for mistaken identity. The Young Sledders in 1991 reported a gray creature with the head of a coyote that chased them with large, dog-like bounds. Again, not what we would expect from a primate. Canine heads and large, sharp claws are consistent among these Beast of Bray Road reports, which could be misleading with some apes, but not the type that is typically described or associated with North America's Sasquatch. As Bigfooters, we also put a lot of stock into circumstance. And the circumstance behind these sightings do not reflect zoology, for a number of reasons. First being the presence of the paranormal or spiritualism in these particular cryptid encounters. It indicates to me an overall lack of realism. Andreezy stated that her first impression was that she was seeing something, quote, supernatural, satanic, and straight out of hell. She claims that when she reported her sighting to County Animal Control Frederickson, books flew off the shelf as if they were thrown. Officer Frederickson did indicate that something, quote, unusual occurred when he met with Andreezy, but that is as specific as he chose to be. Do I think that a group of 13-year-old sledders saw a massive leaping canine that chased them all the way home? No. No, I don't. A report was made, but if any one of these kids' parents actually believed this story, they would have gone back to the location, found evidence in the snow, told police that a wolf or cougar or something attacked their kids, and there would have been dogs and police and sharpshooters, and it would have been a big deal, and we would have heard of it by now. Plus, if it chased them for half a mile, as they claimed, don't you think it would have caught them? Or do werewolves do bluff charges too? Do I believe that teenager Tom Brichta hit an animal with human-like arms that night? The same human-like animal that caused an accident 7 miles down the road?
Around that.
I thought it was possible. Until I read that 2 months later, he claimed to see a 7-foot-tall werewolf, quote, snickering at him while walking down the side of the road through 6-foot corn. And what of the watchman at the asylum? Did a creature, quote, from hell, speak to him as it rummaged through a Native American burial mound outside a convent where one of the Kennedys got a lobotomy? I don't know. This has all the trappings of a spiritual and personal encounter, of the psychological, not physical type. Not saying I discount the story entirely, but zoologically speaking, I regard it as more or less irrelevant. Studying the occult is well and good and all. Some very smart and powerful people seem to think that it was worth some time and money, but I'm not sure it's in the same discussion as Bigfoot.
Now, since 1991, the Wisconsin town of Elkhorn has been the lair and hunting ground of a terrifying creature that is the closest thing one can imagine to a real-life werewolf. The monster has become known as the Beast of Bray Road, on account of the fact that many of the initial sightings were made on that particular road in that town. Without doubt, the expert on the monster is an author and journalist named Linda Godfrey. Some years ago, there was an interview with Linda about her research into this malignant beast, which has become known as the Dogman. Since 1991, reports have surfaced from other parts of Wisconsin, Michigan too. Linda said the story first came to her attention in about 91 from a woman who had heard rumors going around here in Elkhorn, and particularly in high school, that people had seen something like a werewolf, a wolf-like creature or wolf man. They didn't really know what it was, but some were saying it was a werewolf, and the werewolf tag has just gotten used because she thinks that people really didn't know what else to call it. She said she started checking it out. She talked to the editor of the week newspaper, and she was trying to get a job in the town to investigate this, and he said, why don't you check around a little bit and see what you hear. This was about the end of December in 1991, and being a weekly newspaper that she started working for, we weren't really hard news, we were much more feature oriented. So I asked a friend who had a daughter in the high school. She said, oh yeah, that's what everyone's talking about. So I started my investigations and got one name from the woman who told me about it. She was also a part-time bus driver. In my first phone call to this bus driver, she told me that she had called the county animal control officer. So of course, when you're a reporter, anytime you have a chance to find anything official, that's where you go. I went to see him, and sure enough, he had a folder in his file that he'd actually marked werewolf in a tongue-in-cheek way. People had been phoning into him to say that they had seen something. They didn't know what it was, but from their descriptions, that's what he had put. So of course, that made it a news story. When you have a public official, the, county control officer, looking into this, people start giving it credence, and it just took off from there. And they kept finding more and more witnesses, and it really started to take off in the town. While there are numerous different types of dogmen, some think they're demonic entities, some think they're shapeshifters, some think they're flesh and blood, a rare, unique kind of wolf. The list goes on and on. One of the strangest theories that people hear is that they are creatures of extraterrestrials. Thank you everybody for being here so far. Looks like we got about 100 people. Let me just see one thing before we get into this next video. Shout out to Waterhead, $5 donation through Streamlabs, no comment. Rasta with a $5 donation through Streamlabs says, to keep those dogmen at bay. Highly appreciate the help, guys. It's super helpful right now with all the suppression that's going on.
As I approached the stop sign, I got a clear view of the lake. It's about 20 yards from the stop sign to the lake. I looked over, and crouched down next to the lake were two figures. I didn't think anything of it at first, until I drove past the stop sign, and one of them stood up and looked at me. I pulled over and stared at it. They both looked like mutant bears, but muscular, with human features. I could see fingers with claws. Its face was human-like, but with a snout. I watched for a good minute until the second creature stood up, and when it did, I hightailed it out of there. I don't know what they were. I think werewolves, but I never saw them again, nor do I want to. Yes, this is the account of a woman out of Spring Lake Park, Minnesota. Apparently, there are werewolves running loose in North America, folks. The infamous dogmen. I know that there are a lot of people who think they're too old to be believing in werewolves. I mean, why believe in something that you've never seen? Why entertain such an idea as a real-life werewolf? Why? Because people claim to have encountered them. And even though their experiences seem crazy, we can't assume that they're all liars. Now, the majority of us have never encountered a lion, tiger, or bear even, and perhaps never will. This planet is bigger than you think. Most of the wildlife that exists has never been seen in real life by the majority of people that exist. But most city dwellers can swear up and down that there is no such thing as dogmen or other cryptoids. Oh man, they're just demons, dude. Well, if that's the case, then it doesn't help. In fact, that's worse, because demons like to follow you home. There are thousands of eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot and or dogmen. In other words, some claim to have seen both of these beings together. These dogmen have been sighted in over 32 states and in other countries such as Norway, Brazil, New Zealand, Australia, Austria, the UK, and of course the list goes on. Now, according to witnesses, this dogman is a 5.5 foot to 8 foot tall, 200 to 300 pound muscle man with thick fur, a humanoid face with a short snout, long pointed ears, fangs, elongated paws with possibly fingers and definitely claws, red or yellow glowing eyes, the works. People have seen these things running on their hind legs, which appear to be bent backwards like a canine, at speeds over 40 miles per hour. The odor that they describe ranges from a skunky smell to a dirty dog's ass smell. But the difference of odors between Bigfoot and dogmen is somehow distinctive. Many assume that dogmen are just another species of Sasquatch. However, many researchers agree that this is not the case, as dogmen are a smaller and less bulky creature. They also tend to be more aggressive and less covert, as they seem not to care who sees them. Now, Bigfoot does not seem to be a predatory being, but this dogman does. It has been reported that this being will stalk you, it will growl at you, and it will probably eat you. But of course, you'll never hear that from the people that have been eaten. Predatory animals don't like for their prey to see them coming. It scares the prey off. In most cases where the predator is spotted by the prey, the predator runs off. In many cases, they have, however, been sighted feeding on deer and other wildlife. Speaking of wildlife, these dogmen are frequently sighted when coyote are present, in areas where coyote are not normally present, which means that something is attracting these coyote to these dogmen. What's interesting is that UFO sightings have also often occurred in the same area around the same time as these dogmen sightings. Here's a funny thought. What if these dogmen are just the pets of alien beings, taken for a walk on Earth, allowed to roam free, preying on whatever and whoever? Or maybe these things are the human beings turned monster that we are all familiar with, thanks to Hollywood. There is the story of a man who traveled to Portugal, claiming to have met a man who was a werewolf. Now, he traveled to this small town in Portugal and met this guy, who took him up into the woods and apparently began to transform. However, the traveler did get away from the guy, but only to stumble upon the home of one of the locals who already knew this guy was a werewolf. In fact, all of the townspeople knew that this man was a werewolf but said nothing because they figured the traveler would just end up being another werewolf snack. Now, guns seem to just scare dogmen off. Bullets have very little effect, if any at all. People have reported shooting them, and these beasts just run off into the woods and are never found dead. Also, from what people have reported, these things, like gremlins, don't like bright light, or electronics for that matter. This tells us that these beings are very sensitive to certain frequencies, as well as emit certain frequencies that animals and humans are sensitive to as well. People sometimes say that these dogmen give off the strange vibe of feeling angry towards humans. Maybe because these dogmen hunt and eat the same game, and see us as a threat to their food supply, because all they seem to do to humans is scare them off. Look at it this way. An animal will in most cases attack you because it is afraid of you. Humans do it all the time, but dogmen usually end up growling at folks. Speaking of growling at people, here's something that I found interesting. The hair on the dogman's body, like Bigfoot hair, is not just ordinary hair, but it's expected to be what gives these beings the ability to cloak or camouflage themselves, like the predator. And the growling actually sends out a vibration that stuns people or clouds their minds so that they can't see the beast even if they know exactly where the creature is. More and more people are coming out with these stories of dogmen, and the discussion is growing. I do believe in the near future we will learn the truth about these sightings, and we will know for certain that these cryptoids exist. But until that day, the tales told of Dogman are great for some campfire fun.
Now, he mentioned coyotes in there. I don't know if any of you guys have ever looked into the history of coyotes, and I don't condone watching the Joe Rogan podcast, but he had a guest named Dan Flores on that talks about the history of the coyote, gets into the history of the American domesticated dog as well, and why we see so many numbers of coyotes. It was really interesting shit. You guys might want to check that out. His name's Dan Flores. It was just all about coyotes. He didn't get off into DMT or any of this stuff. It was just a normal podcast about nature and outdoors and the weird history coyotes in this country. You might want to listen to that one. Now, one of the most mystifying puzzles of relatively recent times is that what became known as the Dogman. The creature resembles a huge wolf, but with one big difference. This creature walks on its back legs, upright. Well, kind of like a wolf, but the closest thing to it. Inevitably, parallels between dogmen and werewolves are always made. Certainly the leading expert in this field is the Linda Godfrey, who has written a number of excellent books on the subject, including Real Wolfmen and the Michigan Dogmen. Now, one of the lesser-known aspects of the dogmen phenomenon is that which connects it to the men in black, or as some people have stated, the women in black as well. There are cases in which witnesses to and investigators of the dogmen have been visited by men in black and warned not to talk about their encounters. Granted, the number of cases are small. This woman investigated 6 type cases, but when compared to each other, a pattern definitely emerges. One of the cases comes from Linda's investigation in the first weekend of August 2016 when she was investigating it. She spoke at this Ken Gerhard's symposium in the city of Defiance, Ohio. It's a nice name for a city, Defiance, which was the site of numerous werewolf and dogman sightings back in 1972. It was during a break at the symposium that Linda briefly mentioned her odd story to me, a story that went on to expand as follows. It was around 2003. It's a normal day. Happened to be out in this place. It was called Hospital Road, which is just off of Bray Road, the Bray Beast. and where a lot of sightings of dogmen had taken place on that particular juncture of the road. There were a couple of cameramen and 2 colleagues of mine that were there with me, and we were all being filmed for a TV show. It was the turn of one of my colleagues to be filmed. The other one and I were just standing at the side of the road waiting and seeing what was going on, when this very large black sedan pulled up. As the window came down, there was an older woman in the car, nobody that I knew. We looked at her as the window came down, and she said in an accent that sounded like maybe Russian, but could have been Eastern European, "Do you need any help?" There was something about her mannerisms. It wasn't that she was tentative or worried about anything. She just stated this in a really almost commanding way. And my friend and I looked at each other and we just said, "No, thank you. We're just filming." And it was like she really didn't understand what we said, because she said again, "Do you need any help? Can I help you?" We said no thanks again. She still didn't drive away though. She looked over at the cameraman who was filming the activity, and she seemed a little reluctant to leave. But there wasn't really any great reason she could think of to justify saying, so she finally turned and stepped on the gas kind of slowly, and that was it. But it just struck me as so strange at the time. She was dressed in black, but it wasn't like a formal business suit or anything. The car was black. The interior was dark. I would estimate she was probably in her 60s. Had a deep voice. Her hair was grayish, pulled back. There was a bit of exoticness to her. It was such an odd thing. It was out of the ordinary and stuck in my mind. She just didn't fit into the local populace in any way. Of course, those of the skeptical nature would likely be inclined to say this was simply a case of a woman in black taking an interest in a TV shoot, rather than an incident involving the men in black. I should stress, though, that in other cases I have on file, where witnesses saw the dogmen, they were visited by the men in black. The black-dressed entities were on scene almost impossibly quick and always in cars. You know, the black sedans that pull up. So we started taking a deeper look at some of these cases. And she ended up having 6 of these.
Right around June 1979, I was 13 years old. And it was pretty much typically like any other day. During the off-school hours or on the weekends, we would always make plans to go fishing. Not a lot of my friends were old enough, nor would their parents buy them a weapon, but my father was always, "I'm going to get you your shotgun at 12 years old, we're going to go get your permit," and he was part of a rod and gun club. We're going to get your permit, and then next thing you know, you graduate to a 30-06 or a 35 or 32. Mine was a Remington. I remember that shotgun well. So anyway, it was typically an average day. We had pre-planned earlier that day to do some nighttime bullhead fishing, catfish, if you will, with 2 friends of mine. We'll call one John, and we wanted to meet on Burden Lake Road near this one particular street light at about, we made plans for 10 o'clock. Throughout the course of the day, you got to do your chores and you're not done, you know what I mean? So it ended up being midnight. And so we all agreed upon that, and we get on our bikes and we ride down there. This particular time, none of us happened to ride our bikes because it was relatively close to everybody's house. So we met in front of the mailbox, and now to give people a frame of reference, or to try to give them a good image in their mind, it was just after a rainstorm. Now, to make people try to understand, out in Burden Lake, when it was cloudy and it was that late at night. Oh, for anybody who has any questions about why is a 13-year-old being up at 12 o'clock at night, back in that day, your parents really didn't have to keep an eye on you. It was way safer back then. And besides, I could carry a weapon and I knew my way around a weapon, so our parents were all good with that. And nighttime fishing was a common thing for kids back then. You grab a Coleman lantern, you grab some lunch, or, something to eat in a small cooler. In this case, we didn't have a lot of money, so we, lunch bags, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or bologna and cheese. And we would meet up and do our thing. And this particular night, we met up at the mailboxes to divvy up earlier in the day, if I had a chance, or my friends, we would go fishing for minnows. And we would use the minnows as bait, and if we caught sunfish or something like that, we'd cut them up and use the sunfish as bait, because bullheaded bottom feeders, anything you stick on a hook that floats to the bottom, that stinks really bad, they're all over it. To them, that's like lunchtime. So we would go bait fishing if we could throughout the course of the day, preparing for our fishing expedition, if you will, at night. So that's pretty much what happened. So we were underneath the street light, and it was just after the rainstorm. And now I want you to understand, after a rainstorm out in Burden Lake, you know, everywhere else it's almost like different. You know what I mean? It's like Burden Lake is like a lost world. It's like another time, you know? After a rainstorm, even a semi-cloudy day, the night is like dark as ink. I mean, pitch black. But you could clearly see from one street light to the next. That's not a uncommon thing to look at when we're doing what we're doing. And so we're sitting down underneath the light and we're divvying up the bait, which, John, if you're listening, I caught them all, you didn't. So we were divvying up the minnows and we were deciding on where we were going to go. So at the time, we lived near 3 lakes. Okay, first lake, second lake, third lake. And that's just the way they are. First and second lake are man-made. The third lake is not. That's a natural lake. And it's also the deepest lake. But that's besides the point. So we were divvying up the lures, the bait. And deciding actually if we were going to use jigs or not. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you like to jig in between, you know, bites on we always brought extra poles and stuff. So John looks over my shoulder, past me. Now that wasn't really too unusual. But then he like points and he's like, "What's that?" Now, fishing is the only thing on my mind right now. This is what I want to do. I mean, we went to school all week, so that's like working hard. You know, so that's all on my mind. It's on my mind. So when he said it again, no, like, "Look, what's that?" I got annoyed and I turned around. Excuse me. I was getting a little choked up here. Down at the next streetlight was the most impossible thing. It was impossible. I mean, this is just, you know, this is something you only see in the movies. And it's a freakish nightmare. You know, but there it is. I mean, you know, kids can be prone to flights of fancy, like I said earlier, but man, when it's standing right in front of you. And in between these 2 streetlights is a good 150 yards. So that's roughly 300 feet. So we could see eagle eye clear. And at first, he saw it grab the rail, and we heard it when you're thinking back. Because, you know, sights, the sounds, the smells, everything is prominent. You never really forget it. It's like a mom's baked bread. You never forget that smell. You know what I mean? It's like that. It's not something you forget. So he said first one hand and then the other. And I have to clarify now, they were not paws, they were hands. These had 4 fingers and a thumb, an opposable thumb. And what I saw when I turned around was it was already halfway out of the water. Or, well, I presume the water, there's the dike right there, and it was wet. You could see it. I mean, you could see the water dripping off of it. You could see the breath coming out of its mouth. I mean, it was just picture perfect. I mean, it was just, you couldn't miss it. And, you know, I guess there's that old saying, there's that primal fear, you know, when you're really afraid, you know, not fight or flight. This is primal fear. And so as it steps out of the lake, the other friend of mine, we'll call him Tom, he was like, "Holy blank blank." And that's when this thing heard him say that, and it snapped its head around and looked at us. And I got to tell you, I couldn't see its eyes, but man, you could feel it. You could just feel it. It was like this thing gave off a sense of, the only thing I could say is evil. I can't, projecting fear, but it didn't make any noise. And I don't remember seeing it like a tail or anything like that, but it was definitely dripping water. It was definitely wet. Its mouth was like a German Shepherd. And it had so many teeth in its mouth. You know, I remember thinking to myself, how can it even close its mouth? You know, I mean, and you could see them. I mean, you could see them like the heat just got done brushing them, bright white. Now, all of this may sound like, half an hour, but this is a matter of seconds. I mean, like seconds. This is just instantaneous. And when he said that, and the thing snapped its head around and looked in our direction, it started walking toward us. So from the dike to the small hill we were sitting on. We were sitting in the road. So, it's like, it's the old saying, if a sniper can see you, or you can see a sniper, he can see you. It's the same thing. If we could see it, it could see us, and it did. There's no question about that. And it walked off from underneath the streetlight into the darkness. Now, I hope you remember saying that in between these two streetlights, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face because it's like ink, black. But we could hear it. We could hear it so clear because it was so calm that night. It's right after a rainstorm, and it was so calm, and everything was so. Your senses, they're heightened because you can hear everything, smell everything, see everything, in the exception of the inky blackness. And at first, we could hear it just walking. We could hear its paws slapping, or its feet. I couldn't tell you which ones they were because I was so busy looking at its face and its head, which was unusually large, and the breath coming out of its mouth. I mean, it was something right out of a Hollywood movie set. There's no, yeah. And we could hear this thing walking. And then all of a sudden you could hear the pace pick up. And now I don't know if anybody's familiar with, how you can understand how a four-legged animal is walking and how a two-legged animal is walking. I mean, I know everybody out there listening right now has had friends that get out of the water and run across the pavement. And you could just tell that it's 2 feet, not 4. And this wasn't a gallop. It was a trot. And then the pace started picking up. And that's when we were like, it was like somebody hit us with a bowling ball. I went one way, and my two friends went in completely opposite directions of each other and me. I chose to go up the road. Now, me being a kid that lives in the woods, I breathed the outdoors at the time. I mean, it was just, that's what I was. Why I chose to go up the road, I can't tell you, but I did. And I went up the road, and there's another street light up Knob Hill Road, probably about same distance, 150 yards. And as I got to that streetlight, I slowed down a little bit because I'm thinking to myself, I ran so hard and so fast, I could hear my heart pounding, my breath, all these things running through my mind. And when I say that, I mean like it being the predator, me being the prey, that kind of thing. And I slowed down underneath the streetlight. And as I got to the streetlight, it was making the streetlight that we were just sitting under. As a matter of fact, it was standing right next to our tackle. And then it turned and it looked up at me, up the road. And here I am, like a rabbit in the headlights, standing underneath the streetlight, and it's looking right at me, and it comes right up the road, and I can hear it. So I'm saying to myself, woods, hide, go now. And that's exactly what I did. And when I hit the woods, I had a plan. I'm going to go through the woods. I'm going to go to this old man's house who, at the time, I won't mention his name, but at the time, he owned a kennel. He slaughtered cows for a living and pigs, anybody who wanted their cattle slaughtered. And I was going to go there because that was the majority of the grouping of houses where I thought I might be safe. So I cut through the woods and did what I had to do and made it actually to his house. And he's got a hedgerow that separates his yard from the person next door to him. Well, I saw that hedgerow, and like an Olympic swimmer, I put my hands out in front of my head and I dove into that hedgerow head first. And I sat in that hedgerow, Vic, for, it seemed like hours, but I know it wasn't. And then this thing, this dog man, werewolf, however you want to term it, I don't know, I felt like it was coming after me because I could hear it sniffing. It was at the hedgerow, and I was so scared. I was terrified, and I couldn't move. Talk about primal fear. I couldn't move. I felt like a rabbit that was right next to the cougar. Cougar doesn't see him, so the rabbit don't move. You know what I mean? That's what I felt like. And I'll tell you, anybody out there listening, I don't care how curious you are of these things, you don't want to feel that. You don't want to feel that. Anyway, this thing is sniffing, and I knew it was sniffing for me. And it was a heavy breathing, a heavy breath. Like a cow. You could hear it, like a bull snorting. It was kind of like that, only, longer winded, not just a snort. And it was sniffing for me, and I smelled it, and it smelled like rotten meat and dog urine. And it was the most grotesque smell ever. I mean, a skunk is one thing. A skunk has a unique smell, and you know it. You smell it, and you know it. This is something entirely different. This is a mixture of scents that you can definitely put your finger on. And two of them I clearly recognized was rotten meat and dog urine. And, oh, wet dog. This thing got closer and closer and closer, and I could hear it. I could feel it. And the fear is, I got chills right now just thinking about it, remembering this. And then, like, out of nowhere, like, I'm not a big proponent of God, but man, it's like somebody sent him. He wasn't really a friend of mine. He was a friend of my older brother's, but he was coming home from work or a date, I don't know, but the headlights hit the top of the hill, and you can clearly see the headlights. Now, at this time, I got to tell you, I didn't see this thing. I could just feel it, and I could hear it sniffing. And, when the lights come up the hill, I'm thinking to myself, oh, my God, I'm saved. This is like a godsend. And then everything went quiet. And the lights were gone. I heard his door open. I heard it close. And I didn't hear nothing after that. Nothing. It was like dead silent. But the unusual part is when I say silent, I mean there were no crickets chirping. The frogs stopped croaking. There's peeper frogs out there like you would not believe. As a matter of fact, when I hear them to this day, they put me to sleep because of the memories I have of that. And everything was just, there was no dogs barking. And you got to understand, I'm sitting right next to a kennel. This guy's got dogs everywhere. Not a peep out of these animals. Not a sound. So being that, and I was very aware of this, very aware of it. Being that as it may, I stayed in the hedgerow. I didn't move. I was breathing so light. It felt like my lungs were going to explode because I desperately needed to take a good breath of air, and I couldn't because I was so scared. And then I just got the courage, and I just picked my head up out of the hedgerow, and there was nothing there. And as a matter of fact, the moon was out. It wasn't really super bright, but it was bright enough where it wasn't as dark as it was. And, my eyes had well adjusted to the dark by this time. And I could see, pretty clear. And there was nothing around. I looked. My head was on a 360-degree swivel. Wow. Excuse me. I didn't see anything there. And the kid down the road, I don't know, maybe he was in his house or something like that. I don't know. I managed to get the courage to jump out of the hedgerow. And when I say jump, I mean like I was on a trampoline. I jumped out of that hedgerow and I ran so fast to my house. And lo and behold, when I get there, my buddy Tom is sitting on my deck, screaming at me in profanities to open the door and get in the house, And my mother didn't allow this kid to stay overnight. She didn't even like him or his family. So, it was like, I was like caught between a rock and a hard case, and there's no way I'm going to leave my friend out there. So I invited him in, and we were real quiet the whole night. And, we really didn't talk much. And we did. It was always, what was that? It was a werewolf. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. You saw what I saw. What I saw was blah, blah, blah. I think it was Bigfoot, that kind of thing. We were kids, but I know what I saw. He knows what we saw. For crying out loud. I haven't talked to him in 20 years. Easily 20 years. And my other friend, I haven't seen him in well over 30.
So if anyone's interested in stories like that, or you like shows like that with that format, that's a show called Dogman Encounters. It's on every Friday night. YouTube channel ran by a guy named Vic. Has a new guest every week. There's usually like 2 stories per person. Sometimes they have one long story. It can be an hour, could be 2 hours. It's good late night stuff if you're into that kind of, if you're into that kind of stuff. Everybody's not into those kind of shows. I like the audio podcast of stories like that. It's very relaxing to me. It's nice to listen to late at night. Now, like I said, this wasn't going to be a very long stream tonight. Just wanted to get an hour in with you guys. Because I didn't want to leave you without a spooky Sunday, and I figured just a little dive into some strange creatures would be nice. Ended up having an extra 2-hour interview tonight. We streamed earlier today, so just kind of kind of trying to get caught up here. Let's see here. 1 second. All right. I'm going to see if there's any shorter stories I can share before we go. And one is, it's not going to be Dogman related. It's going to be something about invisible creatures in the woods. There was a witness that claimed to have encountered something that has been likened to the Alien and the Predator movies. Able to evade and elude and attack through the use of artificial cloaking that masks its body and renders it almost invisible. Doctor of Physics Bruce Maccabee, an expert on optics, sounds, lasers at Naval Surface Warfare Center, and researcher into UFO orbs and other unexplained anomalies, describes the case of a predator in the forest on his site, and he later talked about it in the Missing 411 series. But the first time we can find this story is in a book by a woman named Steph Young called Predators in the Woods. Now, a lady called Jan had set up a hunting stand in her native Ohio at the start of the hunting season, sitting in the stand setting it up about 15 feet up between the trees in a forested area. She patiently waited. As she sat there, she passed the time texting with friends, taking photos with her phone. Suddenly the woods went silent, and you'll hear this with a lot of cases. When people find or see these creatures, everything goes silent, and it's noticeably silent. You know, birds are chirping, you hear creaks and cracks, nothing. She noticed that there was no noise at all around her. The birds had stopped, there was no rustling in the foliage, just dead silence. It made her feel suddenly anxious, and she was so unnerved by it that she sent a text saying, "Something is wrong here. The woods just went dead silent. It's odd." She thought it possibly was maybe a panther or a coyote approaching. As her eyes roamed the area, she suddenly noticed a strange visual effect that seemed to be moving across her field of vision. About 20 feet away, it looked like a mirage in the desert, but it was not there. She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes, wondering if it was something in her eyes causing it. But when she put her glasses back on, it was still there. It traveled from left to right in front of her above the ground and then eventually disappeared from sight. When it did, gradually the animal sounds of the forest returned. She later described it like the invisible creature in The Predator. Shortly after this, her nephew was at his high school not far away with other students. Several of them reported seeing strange bright moving lights in the sky as it got dark. They were on their sports field and the lights were directly above them, changing color from white to amber, then they disappeared. So we had these two weird stories just kind of around each other. And you can find way more about these predators in the woods in the Missing 411 series or in Steph Young's work, There's Something Taking People in the Woods, and the book Predators in the Woods. She also has a bunch of YouTube videos up. Now, we're definitely taking requests in the Discord for the next Spooky Sunday. Whatever you want the deep dive to be on, episode number 22. I'd love to get 3 ideas and put the vote back up. So if you guys aren't over on the Discord, I'm going to open it up quick and get you guys the link. Just give me 1 second, and we'll be wrapping up here shortly. Doctor needs to get some sleep. If you guys didn't catch it, I was on Adam Green of No More News channel right before this from about 9 to 11:30. That interview should be up on his channel. You might want to check it out. Pretty good stuff. So give me a couple seconds to get the link here. Make sure you guys can get into Discord. Then you can... There's a folder in there labeled Spooky Sundays, and you can go in there and just whatever topic you want it to be. I'll pick 3 of them, and we'll put a vote up. Whatever wins will be next week's Spooky Sunday. Also, if anybody wants to support what we're doing on this channel, you can do so through PayPal. You can do so through Streamlabs, and I'm going to put those links in the chat as well. I want to say I appreciate you guys finding the channel. Looks like we had about 100 people here without being on the sub feed. That's not too bad. That's not too bad for not being allowed to be seen. But I really don't want to get into it because it just kind of pisses me off at this point. So really, I just want to say I appreciate you guys. I hope everyone's doing well during this lockdown. If you go to all my channels, there's content for days. We've been doing videos every day, streams every day. So if you're bored, go check it out. If you need someone to reach out to, check my description. I have Twitter, I have Discord. If anybody needs to talk, if anybody's going through any shit, you can hit me up. I'll take time of my day to, talk to you, even if you just need, to shoot the shit for a minute or whatever. But that's definitely if you're a person that's, isolated, quarantined, maybe feeling depressed or anything, check out the Discord. There's a lot of different links and people in there that could talk. Just a fun place to be. Fada King says I could use a loan. Oh, I'm sure some people are going to hit me up for that as well. Not made of money, but, we can maybe figure something out for people. I know you're kidding, but other peeps. So thank you, everybody that's thrown some support in my way. Thanks, everybody that's came out and found all the streams. I appreciate everybody here. And as always, I will see you in the next one.